Just press the let's go live button. So let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plain of the internet before we go ahead and get started. As usual, we are broadcasting live on Locals. We're also on YouTube. We're also on Rumble. We're also on Twitter and Facebook and all across the interwebs. And so wherever it is you are tuning in from, we are grateful that you are here and with us. And it looks like they're all working, which is tremendous news. That means we can go ahead and get started. So let's do it, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gouveia. I am a criminal defense attorney at the R&R Law Group located in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. And today, my friends, we're talking about the Republicans. They have decided it is our turn. And they are going after the Democrats. They're going after them big time. We're going to start off there. We've got a bunch of letters that actually hit the tubes that are well worth going through. We know that the Republicans have taken over the House of Representatives. They told us that they were going to come in with a bang, that they were not going to be playing around once they got the gavel. And we'll see if they keep their word. But as you'll notice, we've got 4 different letters that went out, and they're going after all of the big names. You see them all here. Ron Klain, White House Chief of Staff, Christopher Wray, FBI, Merrick Garland, Department of Justice, and Miguel Cardona, one of the most powerful men in America, Secretary of Education. So the prosecutions, the inquisitions, basically everything that the Democrats have been doing to the Republicans for the last several years, looks like we're going to start it all over again, but the Republicans are going to be doing the inquisitioning this time. We've got Adam Schiff we'll listen to today. Unfortunately, he's got several things to say. You know, the J6 committee is going to be wrapping up. So the one big, fat, disgusting political entity is just going to leave, and we're going to get another big, disgusting political entity come in. Not as disgusting, but they're going to come in. And so it's back and forth. The pendulum swings both ways. But before the first fat feeding frenzy can finish, well, they've got to clean up their records. Adam Schiff is communicating about the reports. He's saying that there is a lot of things that they may need to scrub so that the incoming Republicans don't get their dirty hands on it. He also said that he's got some opinions on replying to subpoenas. And we've got Liz Cheney, who is really making everybody angry over at the J6 committee, student council, whatever they've got over there. So we'll talk about all of that in the first segment. In the second segment, we're going to go over to the Supreme Court because there were some pretty interesting oral arguments that took place today, and I clipped a lot, probably a little too much, but a lot. And they were actually pretty fun. They involve this memo that came out from the Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas. You see this guy here. We all know him. He has been responsible for the catastrophic failure on the border. And at the Supreme Court today, they were arguing over this memo, this old. And this was that went out to, thousands of Border Patrol agents all across the country. It's from Alejandro Mayorkas. It basically says, don't do your job, okay? And the states are challenging that. They're saying, how can the government tell the Border Patrol not to do their job? Oral arguments took place today. We've got Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar. She's representing the United States government. We've got clips and questions. Sotomayor was getting into it with her, along with Chief Justice Roerts, saying, why'd your arguments change all of a sudden? Very convenient. So we'll get into that. We've also got representation from the great state of Texas, who is representing the states, and he was there arguing. He took some questions, actually a lot of them. From the 3 liberal judges, we've got Jackson, Kagan, Sotomayor. They really sort of went after this guy, kind of like this dogpile took place. And Kavanaugh and Sotomayor also chimed in. So we're going to listen to both sides of this. We've got the government and Texas. Before we finish up with the final segment, talking about this individual, goes by the name of Sam Brinton, gender fluid. So we'll be very careful on this segment. But we've also got some questions about this, because evidently this guy, this individual, he's fluid, so it changes, right? But this individual was at one point, or is currently actually working for the Biden administration as a nuclear waste person, whatever they do, manage some of this stuff. So we'll take a look at that. Now, I'm not really interested in this case because of this person's, disposition, and I mean that genuinely. But this individual does have a very unique defense, of course, in the allegation, because the allegation is about stolen luggage. And so we're going to break this down. We'll take a look at what Minnesota law says about it, go through the criminal complaint, and see what the Department of Energy has to say about this in our final segment. And so if you want to be a part of the program, my friends, the best place to do that is over at our amazing community, watchingthewatchers.locals.com. They are chatting away over there. Shout out to Uncle Shane. We've also got former LEO, C. Reed's in the house. Speech Unleashed is over there. GDLMAL, Paul Mino is over there. Okay, here's one of the memes that we've got that's floating around in the chat over on the locals chat. And there's no real reason for this. It's just, it's just something floating around based on, I guess, what's coming up on the show today. So sorry about that, Paul. But that's the fun stuff that's taking place over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Shout out to JC the Music Man and others who are there lurking away. All right. And so if you want to go over there, that's the best place to be. Also, by the way, we're on Twitter. Let's see. If you're on Twitter, you can browse over to @RobGovea which is our profile. And we're trying our best to support Elon and, of course, the free speech platform. And so if you're over there, this is what it looks like. We've got 16 viewers, baby. Yes! We're working our way up to the nice 20 number. It's going to be outstanding. So certainly go over there, check that out. We're trying to support, the free speech platforms. We're also, of course, on Rumble. Shout out to our Rumble friends all over here. We've got Adams in the house. We've got End Danger, who we've got some other people on Rumble as well. So wherever it is you're tuning in from, we're grateful for your viewership and your participation in supporting some of these other platforms because they need it. All right. And so now let's get this puppy queued up and get right into it. And shout out to Sesparza on our locals chat. All right. The Republicans are coming up next. The GOP springs into action. We know they're taking over the House of Representatives, and they are coming in hot. We're going to take a look at several different letters that went out already, right? They're not in charge yet, but Jim Jordan and a number of House of Representative GOP members are already sending these letters out quickly. They're going to, and we're going to go through every one of these, more or less the same type of letters, but we just want to see the different agencies that are involved and what they're asking for. The Republicans have promised us a lot. They've said that we're going to really solve all of the Democratic inquisitions that have been taking place over the last 2 years. We're going to get the gavel. We're going to turn the tables on them, and we're going to go really find out what is happening in our government. So we're going to check in with Ron Klain. He's the White House Chief of Staff. He's Biden's right-hand guy. Christopher Wray, we're very familiar with on this show. FBI director, somebody who is very paranoid about, homegrown domestic violent extremism. Much of that comes from this guy, Merrick Garland. He runs the Department of Justice, and so they're going after him for the weaponization of the DOJ. And of course, they want to know more about Miguel Cardona, who is the Secretary of Education. He's somebody who has got a lot of power this time around. In this current administration, he's been able to find a new provision that gives him the power to waive about $400 billion of student loans out of thin air. Also has the ability to go after parents, sort of invoking the aid of the FBI to go prosecute parents who show up at parent-teacher conferences and the whole thing. All of them now subject to inquiry. And so we're going to go through each one of these letters before we take a look at the outgoing leaders in the House of Representatives, in particular, Shifty Schiff and Liz Cheney. They're going away. But before they leave, the Republicans are becoming aggressive, and let's see what they have in store for us. A letter from the GOP over to the White House Chief of Staff, Mr. Ronald Klain. He's assistant to the president and the Chief of Staff. He is the man in charge. He makes a lot of things happen in the White House. Probably everything, because Joe Biden doesn't know much about much. Congress of the United States is where this letter is coming from. You see a bunch of Congress people are signing off on this. We've got Jim Jordan, Steve Chabot, Louis Gohmert, Matt Gaetz. You see the rest of the names on here, right? There's a lot of them. And a lot of these names are going to be on all these letters that we go through. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on each one in terms of who signed it, but they're more or less the same. The Republicans write to the White House, they say. All right, Ron, as we prepare for the 118th Congress when we're in charge, punks. We write again to obtain your voluntary compliance with the outstanding requests for documents and information that we need. We appreciate your prompt attention to these outstanding matters. Okay, this is the introductory phrase. We already sent you a demand for this. Here's our second request. Over the past 21 months, Republicans say we have made several requests for information and documents concerning the Biden administration's misuse of the federal criminal and counterterrorism resources to target parents at school board meetings, the PTA terrorist parents we talked a lot about here. We reiterated and itemized these requests in our recent letter, October 17th, which is enclosed for your convenience down here. If you forgot what we sent to you, it's right down here. October 17th, they said, we're investigating the National School Board Association and what you're doing by unleashing the federal government to go after them. And they gave the whole litany there. Jim Jordan sent this letter back in October. But the federal government doesn't care. They just say, Congress? Jim Jordan? Who cares? And they just keep going about their business. But Jim Jordan, he's going to be in charge soon, and so he's making sure the record is clear. He says, to date, you have ignored these requests. Please be aware that if our requests remain outstanding at the beginning of the next Congress, the committee may be forced to resort to compulsory process to obtain the material that we require. Ooh, don't you like how that sounds coming from this side? It's like we're used to getting this language from, Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson. Okay, well, the Republicans have it. And listen, I disagreed with it back then. I think this is, I don't like the trajectory of any of this stuff. But I've been saying for a long time, if the Republicans don't play the same game as the Democrats, then they're going to get evaporated because this is an existential crisis now. The government has become so weaponized, they're raiding presidential homes. So if the Republicans just sit on their hands and, well, we're not going to do what they do to us because we're better than them, and you do that old school Republican garbage that has caused them to lose a lot of elections, they're going to lose more elections. And so if Jim Jordan and them don't do this, right, well, then they're going to just go bye-bye. Well, good news is it looks like they're doing it. We might result to the compulsory process, which means subpoenas. And if you disagree with those subpoenas, like Steve Bannon did, or like Peter Navarro did, or like Donald Trump has done, guess what happens? Oh, maybe we refer you now over to the DOJ, Ron Klain. In addition, which would be hysterical, right? Because it would be Biden's DOJ. Now, in addition, writes the Republican Party, or the GOP in the House, they say, in addition, to advance our oversight of the Biden administration's use of federal law enforcement on school boards, we also require prompt testimony from employees of the executive office of the president. We expect your unfettered cooperation, in arranging for the committee to receive testimony from these individuals. As an initial matter, we anticipate requiring testimony in hearings or transcribed interviews from the following employees in the next Congress. 4 people listed here. I don't know that you'd recognize any of them. Mary Wall, Julie Rodriguez, Catherine Pantachego, Neasley Silva, don't know. But to avoid any unnecessary delay in receiving these testimony from these employees, we direct your staff to work with committees now on scheduling these events. They're not even in charge yet. And they're already scheduling meetings. I like it. The congressional oversight power, which is rooted in Article 1 of the Constitution, is broad and indispensable. Same type of language Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson used. This authority encompasses inquiries into the administration of existing laws, studies proposed of law, and survey defects, right? All the same, like they basically lifted this language from the J6 letters. Basically, they're probably like, hey, can you get those templates off Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney's computer? Can you send us the Word doc files? Oh, perfect. All right, well, I'll just delete a couple of these paragraphs and just kind of change this around a little bit. I think that might have happened. And surveys of defects in our societal, economic, and political purposes, right? All of the stuff that Congress is supposed to do. The Judiciary Committee is authorized to conduct oversight into these matters. And of course, we'll do that once we are in charge. And we're going to refer this stuff pursuant to the rules of House of Representatives for criminal law enforcement if we need it. Criminal law enforcement. Well, all right. There you go. And look who signed on the letter. Matt Gaetz, Louis Gohmert. We've got Jim Jordan, all in the House. All of them. Andy Biggs from Arizona, shout out, right? We've got Thomas Massey's on there. Got Chip Roy on the list. Scott Fitzgerald, Burgess Owens. All right, so you see what is going on. Now, there's more where that comes from. We've got several letters. We've got the Honorable Merrick Garland. He's next. We've got Christopher Wray. Okay, he's coming up at the FBI. We've got Secretary Miguel Cardona. all coming up. But first, we've got to check in with our friends over. What the heck happened to my mind map? All right, there it is. We've got to check back in over with our friends at Goldco, because we know how important securing your financial savings is. If you have an IRA, a 401k, or a savings account, you know as well as I do that things are scary out there. The Biden administration has already printed more money in the past 2 years than the previous 100 years combined. The national debt has hit a record $30 trillion. Inflation is the highest we've seen since 1982. It's only a matter of time before the house of cards comes crashing down. If you have a retirement savings, your money could be at serious risk. Talk to my friends at Goldco right here on the screen to see how you can protect your retirement with gold and silver before it's too late. Go to robertlikesgold.com. They'll give you $10,000 or more in free silver when you open up a qualifying account. That's over at robertlikesgold.com. Goldco is A+ rated with the Better Business Bureau. They're nice friends of the show. Thank you for supporting Goldco. All right, so we've got Christopher Wray coming up, Merrick Garland, and then Miguel Cardona. And let's see exactly what is happening with the FBI. In a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray, dated November 18th, the new incoming GOP Congress is letting him know to be prepared. They write, "Dear Director Wray, as we prepare for the 118th Congress, we write again, to obtain your voluntary compliance with the outstanding request for documents. We appreciate your prompt attention to these outstanding matters. Over the past 21 months, we've made several requests, including in a recent letter to you, November 2nd, which once again, like the other letter we saw, is enclosed for your convenience. Just reminders." Okay, here's the previous letter on November 2nd. They said, "Dear Director Wray, we've got a lot of questions for you, including why the FBI is purging your employees with disfavored viewpoints. Why do you keep kicking them out? The FBI is not immune to transparency, and you just keep getting on airplanes and flying away every time we've got tough questions for you. So how about you answer those questions? To date, Jordan and others, they say, you've ignored these requests and you haven't responded sufficiently. And if you don't, we're going to be forced to resort to compulsory process to obtain the material we require." To the FBI, subpoena his butt. In addition, to advance our oversight, we require prompt testimony from FBI employees, including, here you go, number 1, Christopher Wray. So why don't you give us your unfettered cooperation in arranging for the committee to receive the testimony from the FBI employees? If you don't, we'll have to go through compulsory processes. Similarly, we saw Paul Abate, Timothy Langman, Jennifer Moore. Now, we've got Stephen M. D'Antonio, or Antonio, right? I don't know how you actually pronounce his name, but he's on all sorts of documents that we read. He signs a ton of this stuff. He's a prosecutor out of the Washington field office. We've also got Elvis Chan. Remember Elvis Chan? San Francisco field office. He was the person, allegedly, who was communicating in the big tech collusion lawsuit that is being brought by Missouri Eric Schmidt. He's suing, and he's saying that Elvis Chan was the person colluding with Jen Psaki and Anthony Fauci in the White House. So the Republicans want information on all these people. So they say, to avoid unnecessary delay in receiving this testimony from these employees, why don't you direct your staff to now schedule these events? Please be advised that the testimony is in addition to periodic hearings, which we're going to convene as well. And get ready for those. Our authority is rooted in the Constitution, and if you do not comply, the Judiciary Committee is authorized to conduct oversight, and they'll refer this matter elsewhere. Again, signed by the same people, led by Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz on the first page. That is to the FBI. Let's see what they're saying to the Department of Justice. Letters from the Republicans now going to Merrick Garland. Attorney General for the United States, leads the Department of Justice, dated November 18, 2022. Again, hey, Merrick, just like we sent to the FBI and to the White House, we're preparing for you too, buddy boy. And guess what? We need some more answers. We sent you a prior letter, actually 3 of them, one on October 11th, one on October 28th, and one on November 2nd. And they're all enclosed down here below. You see them all listed here. October 11th. They said, hey, DOJ, why are you prosecuting the terrorist parents that you say are terrorists who are not? They said previously, even after that, another one, October 28th. Now we're asking about the DOJ and the southern border. Why are you going to use taxpayer dollars to pay settlements to illegal aliens who violated the U.S. law? DOJ, why are you doing that? Can you answer that for us? We're investigating it. That was all sent over. FBI ignored that letter. The DOJ also ignored this letter November 2nd. They said, we are conducting oversight of the DOJ operations and your targeting of journalists now, right? This case involving Project Veritas. Why are you going after these different individual agencies? Department of Justice, answer the Judiciary Committee in the House. But no, that's not what the DOJ does. They don't care. They just said, well, we're the DOJ. We're in charge. We're running stuff here. So leave us alone. And so the Republicans are saying, well, we're coming in hot, buddy boy. So get ready. In advance of our oversight, we require testimony from the following people. 1, Attorney General Merrick Garland. And if he doesn't comply, we'll see if the Republicans use the subpoena. Deputy Attorney General, dun, dun, dun. This is the big one. Lisa Monaco. I'm pretty sure she's the person who's actually running things there at the DOJ. Every time Merrick Garland comes out with a big announcement, guess who's right by his side? Lisa Monaco. And anytime there's something that's a little bit, prickly that maybe Merrick Garland doesn't want his name on, guess who is happily signing that document and shoving it down the gullets of all of us? Lisa Monaco. Associate Attorney General and all of the others, right, for Civil Division, Antitrust Division, National Security Division, Criminal Division. And look who is on this list. Our friend Matthew G. Olson, Mr. Homegrown Domestic Violent Extremist himself. He's the individual who was sitting there with Jill Sanborn when Ted Cruz was asking them questions about Ray Epps and the FBI and all of the other feds who were invested and infested at the J6 protests. And all of them shook their heads. Oh, we don't have any idea. We don't know what you're talking about. We can't comment on any of these investigations. Meanwhile, they've got an entire fake committee that's running their own insurrection on the United States. Matthew Graves, U.S. Attorney for the DOJ, and others, right? All of the people that we're familiar with. They say, to avoid unnecessary delay, why don't you start scheduling these things? And we'll be happy to get them started, right? Same sort of closing. Same members on this one: Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz, Chip Roy, Burgess Owens, and the others. Now, it's not just this one. There is yet a final letter from the GOP to Secretary Cardona. And you may not be familiar with him, right? This is what Merrick Garland looks like. This is what Miguel Cardona looks like. He is the Secretary of Education. He's a person who decided that he had power to just, unilaterally through the executive branch, with the stroke of a pen and executive order, waive about $400 billion of money, right? He just sort of wrote that into the budget somehow. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. And he's also responsible for some of the parent-teacher conference inquisitions taking place in your local neighborhood. So let's see what the Republicans had to say to him. They say, Dear Secretary Cardona, we are preparing to come after your booty. We write again to obtain your voluntary compliance because you haven't cooperated previously. And over the past 21 months since Biden took over, we have reiterated our itemized requests for answers in our prior October 17th letter. Here's what they said in that letter. They wrote, Dear Mr. Cardona, you have some reason found it necessary to use federal law enforcement authorities against parents who are at their schools. We're asking about documents pertaining to that and how it chills the First Amendment rights when you create anxiety by calling parents terrorists and by invoking FBI oversight over parent-teacher conferences, sort of saying that's kind of insane. He says that we've asked you for information about that, but, please be aware that if our requests remain outstanding at the beginning of the next Congress, our committee may be forced to resort to a compulsory process to obtain the materials we require. And we also want to talk to these people involved. People named Kimberly, Larry Bowden, and Nicholas Summons, all people who are working at the Department of Education. They say, we've got the power to do this, and we are going to do it. And we're going to do it hard and fast. So get ready for it. signed again by Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz, and the rest of them. So all 4 of these letters are now making their way over to, well, hopefully have landed on all of these individuals' desks, and we'll see if there is any response to that, because the Republicans will be in charge soon, and we'll see if they can keep their word, right? If they are denied. Miguel Cardona doesn't send over the information. Merrick Garland denies that. Christopher Wray says, we're good. What happens? Well, the next step would be that they do just what the Democrats have done to the Republicans. In this case, they just refer it over to the DOJ. They form a committee. They say they issue a subpoena. They decline the subpoena, refer it over to the DOJ. And what's the DOJ going to do? Well, these are friendlies now, right? These aren't Steve Bannons. These aren't Peter Navarro's. This isn't Donald Trump anymore. So how are those prosecutors going to live with that double standard, right? If they had an epic meltdown because Steve Bannon ignored a J6 committee subpoena, what happens when some of these lefties ignore a GOP Judiciary Committee subpoena? Now, for all of these public figures, and I'm very certain that Jim Jordan knows this, they're all going to invoke executive privilege, right? Executive immunity. Many of the same defenses that we've talked about with Donald Trump, they're going to do the same. I'm Christopher Wray. I'm sort of immune as an executive administration official, and so I'm immune from some of these congressional subpoenas. Leave me alone. And we'll see if the Republicans, want to litigate this stuff. They should, just like the Democrats did. But the problem is, of course, is the Republicans are in a bad jurisdiction. They're operating out of the DC jurisdiction, which is totally in favor of the Democrats. So we'll see if it goes anywhere, but at least the letters look good. I mean, we like going through some letters here, and at least the letters feel good. Maybe that's the most of it, but hopefully not. We'll see where it goes. But we've got some reaction. Of course, we have the outgoing leaders, so-called alleged, in the House of Representatives, who are the Democrats, are on their way out. And we've been following the J6 committee show trial inquisition for some time now, asking ourselves, what's the point of this? Are they going to propose new legislation, right? They're supposed to do something at the end of this. Is it going to be an indictment of Donald Trump? Is it going to be a referral for legislation saying that, any insurrection, we find by legislative resolution that this was an insurrection led by Trump, therefore Trump can't run under the Fourth Amendment insurrection clause. Okay. Is that what they're going to do? Are they just going to issue a report and we're just all going to sit around and supposed to read it or something? What's the point of all this? And if the committee sunsets and the Republicans come in, are they just going to leave their files in the file drawer? Right? Are the Democrats just going to say, okay, here you go, Republicans. We have been doing a very thorough, very above board, purely ethical, extremely comprehensive, something representative of both sides. Here's our investigation. Here it is, just right over for you. You can pick it up. We did such a great job that you can sort of read our work and see if there's been anything problematic in it. Or are they going to take that and anything that is not highly vetted, highly narrative crafted, everything else goes in the shredder because they don't want you to see what they did? Which is it going to be? What do you think? Well, let's listen to Adam Schiff and see what he says about this. Adam Schiff, one of the pencil necks on the J6 Select Committee, is discussing what their final report is going to look like and what they might need to do to ensure its integrity.
Consensus on the report. We're very close to that now. We're close to the putting down the pen and going to print. And I think the report is going to set out in a, I hope, very comprehensive way what took place, what led to that attack, and all the circumstances around that. We're also going to be releasing the evidence, which may be the most important thing. The voluminous transcripts, the documents and emails. We want to make sure that that's put before the American people. We certainly don't want the Jim Jordans of the world to cherry pick anything not disclosed and make a false or misleading narrative out of it. So the country's going to have the evidence. They're going to have our report. And I'm enormously proud of what we've done and know I'll be proud of the final result.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Jim Jordan has already said that he is going to, he will be the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He is going to go through the evidence you left out. You're saying that there won't be evidence that will not be made public.
The evidence will all be made public. Now we'll have to...
What evidence? The evidence that they've selected or all of the evidence? In other words, to use a Kamala Harris circle Venn diagram analogy, are we going to get the full circle or only a subset of the circle that they think is accurate? What is it going to be? Now, the question that I had was about what the rules said. And previously, I forgot to pull this up before we started the show, but there was a question that popped up on Twitter about this. And this is what it looked like. The question came in from Amuse on Twitter, official online safety expert, keeping you safe, says, I know safety, and says here, a question for the lawyers. Can Adam Schiff actually destroy the J6 evidence before the GOP takes control of the House? Okay, this is essentially what Adam Schiff is describing right now. Can they do this? The House Intel chairman admits they're going to scrub some of the evidence from its final report. Is that legal? Right, and this is what Adam Schiff is talking about. And so I posted this on Twitter, by the way. If you're on Twitter, shout out to you for watching there. But this is what I looked up yesterday. And remember, we've taken a look at HR 503. HR 503 is the founding document for the J6 committee. And in the document, it says that it shall be comprised of 13 members. It is not. So I've said it's illegal from the beginning. So I wrote the whole committee exists in violation of their own rules. So the rules don't matter, in other words. Okay, can they do this? Can they do that? Is it legal to dispose of evidence? If they brought out a shredder, could they just, start shredding things? And is anybody going to care? Nobody cares. The Department of Justice doesn't care. The DOJ just says, well, if you find that it's a problem, if you think that this is worthy of criminal charges, just send it over to us. We don't care. We'll prosecute it. No problem. The courts don't care about the formation of the committee. Okay, they say 13 members. Okay, well, 9's good enough. It says 5 Republicans should be on there, though. Well, 2's good enough, right? It doesn't matter. So my point is the rules don't matter. But if you look to the rules say that, yeah, they do have some redaction power, right? This is what is actually in HR 503 specifically. You see it says treatment of classified and sensitive matter. Any report that's issued by the select committee shall be issued in unclassified form, right? So we should be able to see it, but it may include a classification index or annex and a law enforcement sensitive annex or both, right? So they can issue a final report, but they can redact a ton of stuff if they want to. Now they also see here, when the select committee is terminated, upon disposition, the disposition of the records of the select committee, okay, shall become the records of the committee that is designated by the speaker. Okay, so I'm going to presume that the committee is going to wrap up. Nancy Pelosi will appoint the committee, appoint the records to another committee. But the question will be, what do they actually turn over? In other words, does the current January 6th select committee shred a bunch of their documents before they turn these materials and the records back over to the other committee? Obviously. Okay, so the rules say that essentially they can do this. There's nothing in the rules that I read through that say that they have to keep the full universe of records, right? They can go through all of the hay, get all of the needles out that they want, and then get rid of the hay and just show America all of the needles. And we say, yeah, but what about all the hay? And there's some other problems with that and over here and all this. And they say, well, you don't get to look at that because we've extracted what we need. We've provided the relevant facts to you. And we've decided what's true, what's reality, and what isn't. And they can basically do whatever they want. They've already been operating doing whatever they want anyways, because the judiciary and the executive branch has been deferential to Congress. They've just said they can just form whatever kind of committee they want. And everybody has been giving it legitimacy. So they've been operating with legitimacy. But even if they were being honest with themselves, if Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson, and you said, guys, your rules say 13 members, you have 9. You agree that that is not the same, right? That's not what your rules say. I can't imagine what they would respond to that, but I guess nobody's ever asked them that because I don't know why people don't read the documents or care, but that's the point, right? They can essentially do this. They can do whatever they want. They've been operating outside the purview of any oversight for years now. So who cares? This is back to Adam Schiff explaining.
Make sure that
To
done and know I'll be proud of the final result.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Jim Jordan has already said that he is going to he will be the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He is going to go through the evidence you left out. You're saying that there won't be evidence that will not be made public.
The evidence will all be made public. Now, we'll have to make sure that we scrub that evidence for personally identifiable information, that the evidence that we provide protects people's security, it doesn't put them at risk. So there are things that we're going to have to do along those lines. But yes, we want to put the evidence before the American people, which supports the hearings that we've done, as well as the report that we'll put out, and will be a comprehensive picture and all the circumstances around that. We're also going to be releasing the evidence, which may be the most important thing. The voluminous transcripts, the documents and emails. We want to make sure that that's put before the American people.
So he says we're going to scrub some of it. We'll see what ultimately ends up in their manila file folders, in their briefcases, their file cabinets that they turn over to the Republicans. But I'm not so optimistic that it's going to be the full universe of all the evidence. And by the way, right, it's necessarily missing, right, a huge portion of the universe of evidence, right? We know that they did interviews with Wray Epps, and we know that they sat down with some of these people. But they didn't allow for any adversarial proceedings even to take place. Okay, so real Republicans on the committee, not Liz Cheney, not Adam Kinzinger, who are the fake Republicans who are not even in the party anymore, are going to actually investigate ulterior avenues. Go after Christopher Wray and ask him, how many feds were in there? I want to know exactly how many feds, what were their names, where were they located, how long had they been undercover, what were they doing? But none of that happened, because it was not even a representative committee in the first place. Now, Pencil Neck Watermelon Head is here, and he is communicating about McCarthy. He's very upset that he may be booted off of the Intelligence Committee soon. Adam Schiff takes digs at Kevin McCarthy, the guy who's going to be in charge of the House of Representatives, very likely to take away Mr. Schiff's position on an Intelligence Committee. Of course, what happens? He blames all of the fringe elements of the Republican Party, saying that McCarthy is compromised.
As you well know, the man who was trying to be Speaker, a Republican, Kevin McCarthy, says that he wants to kick you off the Intelligence Committee, the committee that you now chair, because of your handling of the Trump-Russia investigation, and specifically that you repeatedly asserted that there was direct evidence of collusion, direct collusion, which didn't materialize. What's your response to McCarthy?
Well, McCarthy apparently doesn't think it's collusion if your campaign manager is giving inside polling data and battle strategy in key states to an agent of Russian intelligence while the Russians are helping your campaign. But most Americans would call that collusion.
Okay.
McCarthy's problem is not with what I've said about Russia. McCarthy's problem is he can't get to 218 without Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar and Matt Gaetz. And so he will do whatever they ask. And right now, they're asking for me to be removed from my committees, and he's willing to do it. He's willing to do anything they ask. And
you should be removed because you have no intelligence. All of your allegations about Hunter Biden, your cover-up of that story, your allegations about Trump-Russia collusion, all of it was manufactured. It was all hoaxed up. Even CNN has the stones to ask you about it, and she did it very carefully. Did you see her sort of response? Kind of reading down there from the paper. You know, you sort of lied to all of us about this story here. So can you answer that?
We'll do whatever they ask. And right now they're asking for me to be removed from my committees, and he's willing to do it. He's willing to do anything they ask. And that's the problem. Kevin McCarthy has no ideology. He has no core set of beliefs. It's very hard not only to get to 218 that way, it's even more difficult to keep 218. That's his problem. So he will misrepresent my record. He'll misrepresent Derek Swalwell or Ilhan Omar, whatever he needs to do to...
Nobody's misrepresenting your record. You claimed Trump-Russia collusion wasn't proven, and it's the end of the story.
Get the votes of the QAnon caucus within his conference.
He's not the only one. The incoming oversight chair, James Comer, told Punchbowl News in an interview, "I don't believe congressional investigations have a whole lot of credibility now. I blame Adam Schiff for that.
Yeah.
But it's also both parties to blame for investigations in the past. I want to change that."
Well, we'll see if Comer's going to be right about this. Now, I've said for a long time, if the Republicans, lay down their arms first, the Democrats are not going to lay down their arms. Are you kidding me? Look what's happening around this country. They are as visceral as ever. So if the Republicans just, oh, well, we're going to be nice this time and we're going to go through and we're just going to investigate, only the appropriate, reasonable things that most Americans want, like that might be true. I think most Americans do want this. Like, I think most Americans are sick and tired of this, to be honest, right? I know. I think it's a shame what we've seen happen with the January 6th Select Committee. It's been a travesty of justice through and through, beyond anything political. What has happened to the so-called insurrectionists, right? The presumption of innocence, due process. It is one of the most disgusting things that has happened in this country ever, right? And it's going to continue on, right? Probably just barely in the middle of it, right? They're still, the FBI is just getting new throngs of information from Google, cell phone data, and all sorts of stuff. But it's happening, right? This is the new, Committee on Un-American Activities, right? This is the new, it's a travesty that what's been happening. But if the Republicans don't do the same thing, if they don't play with the same weaponry that the Democrats are playing with, they're going to get evaporated because they're raiding presidential homes. They're calling Republicans MAGA extremist ideologues, all of them, right? There's like not a reasonable Republican anymore unless you are a lefty. Unless you're Adam Kinzinger or Liz Cheney, you're not a reasonable Republican anymore. You're a MAGA extremist. Jim Jordan's a MAGA extremist. Kevin McCarthy, who's one of the most milquetoast conservatives, Republicans in the whole country, doesn't have a set of morals, and he's been commandeered by Matt Gaetz and all of these other people, right? They want the Republicans gone. They want them evaporated. And I really respect James Comer. I think his work has been outstanding. We've covered a lot of it here. And I agree with him, right? Adam Schiff is responsible for a lot of this. Both parties are to blame for this. And he says, I want to change it, but we'll see.
What's your response?
Well, Comer doesn't believe in the Russian investigation. He doesn't believe in the Ukraine investigation. He doesn't believe in the investigation of January 6th.
Yeah.
And why? Because those are investigations of the serial abuse of power by Donald Trump. And Comer and Jordan and McCarthy will do nothing but carry Donald Trump's water. Someone, as you point out, who's sitting down for dinner with anti-Semites, who's sitting down for dinner with bigots who won't condemn them. This is who they're making common cause with. And so they will do and they will say what they need to get along with Donald Trump.
So we know that one's coming out. They're not going to let that one go. Get used to that being inserted every other interview. Trump Kanye, Trump Fuentes, Trump all of it, right? All of it is going to be never ending. So just buckle up for that one. But all right, so we've got that one. We also have a clip here from this guy who says that he may be cooperative. We'll have to see. Schiff was responsible for sending a ton of subpoenas out as his part in the January 6th Select Committee evolved. But now that the tables have turned, now that the Republicans might be in charge of the House, Schiff, are you going to respond to their subpoenas?
If you are subpoenaed by Republicans when they take over, will you comply?
We'll have to consider the validity of the subpoena.
Oh, the validity of the subpoena. Isn't that nice? Don't you just love that? Yeah. So every single time that anybody challenged one of the subpoenas that Shifty Schiff sent over their directions, if Bannon said, no, we're going to challenge this, we're going to file a lawsuit. If Trump says we're going to file a lawsuit or challenge this, or we're not showing up, we've got executive privilege. Shifty many times said that they were undermining American democracy, that they were being disorderly in the proper administration of justice. And how dare they? How dare they question the validity of a congressional subpoena? It's automatically valid just by virtue of the fact that it came from Congress. But if it goes to Little Pencil Neck's address, he says he's going to have to consider whether or not to comply.
If you are subpoenaed by Republicans when they take over, will you comply?
We'll have to consider the validity of the subpoena.
What a joke. All right. So hopefully the Republicans say, well, we've considered the validity, and we've got a ton of precedent, by the way. You said the last time somebody ignored one of your congressional subpoenas that guess what had to happen is jail time. Bannon's going to prison for 60 days. Maybe Pencil Neck can have a nice little cell next to him. Well, we'll continue to cover that, of course, but he is not alone. Also outgoing from the United States Congress is Liz Cheney. She lost her election by 40 points because everybody in Wyoming hates her. But it's not just those brilliant people in Wyoming. It's also the people who are on the committee itself. Can't stand Liz. Washington Post reports that the January 6th panel staffers are angry at Cheney for focusing so much of the report on Trump. 15 former and current staffers expressed concerns that important findings unrelated to Trump will not become available to the American public. Oh, man. Didn't Pencilneck just tell us that they were going to tell us everything in there? The American people are going to see everything, all of the depositions and everything that we need to make sure is available for their digestion. But according to the Washington Post, Jacqueline, Josh, and Carol, they're all telling us that no, in fact, the committee themselves are disappointed that huge swaths of information are going to be nuked from the reporting. Since Liz Cheney accepted Speaker Pelosi's offer, okay, so this didn't come from the Republicans at all. It came from Nancy to serve on the chair. She's exerted a remarkable level of control over the committee. Yeah, because she's running for president, obviously. Now, less than 6 weeks before the conclusion of their work, Cheney's influence over the committee's final report has rankled many current and former of the committee staff. They are angered and disillusioned by Cheney's push to focus the report primarily on the former president, Donald Trump, because that's all that matters. They have bristled at the committee morphing into what they have come to view as a vehicle for the outgoing lawmaker's political future running for president. 15 former and current staffers who spoke on the condition of an anonymity to discuss internal deliberations expressed concerns that important findings unrelated to Trump will not become available. The feuding brings to the fore a level of public acrimony within the committee that previously had largely played out behind the scenes, as public attention was focused on a series of blockbuster public hearings and, of course, the midterm elections. Yeah, all of this comes out after the fact. Several committee staff members were floored earlier the month when they were told that a draft report would focus almost entirely on Trump, excluding other reams of investigative work. Potentially left on the cutting floor or relegated to an appendix were revelations from the blue team, law enforcement. Yeah, exactly. Look, all of this is being left out. The reports from the blue team, the group that dug into law enforcement and the intelligence community's failure to assess the looming threat and prepare for the well-forecast attack on the Capitol. Obvious. It's either the intelligence community is grossly incompetent for failing to predict and plan for and prevent what we saw at the Capitol, which has only resulted in less than 1,000 criminal charges, okay? Less than 1,000 people caused all of that. So they're either grossly incompetent that they couldn't even manage 1,000 people, or they wanted it to happen and they were complicit in it. It has to be either of the other, one of the two. It's just so embarrassing. Otherwise, why do they need about, I don't know, $1 trillion every year for defense spending budget, CIA, FBI, national defense, DOJ, DHS, all of it for our security to protect, the government and us, allegedly. They couldn't even prepare for it. The proposed report would also cut back on much of the work of the Green Team, which looked at the financing for the January 6th attack. Don't want to see where the money came from. And the Purple Team, which examined the militia groups and the extremists, only about Trump, because that's all this was all about. Somebody said, we all came from prestigious jobs. We dropped what we were doing so that we could focus on this. We were told that it was going to be an important fact-finding investigation that would inform the public. No, said one former committee staffer. But when the committee became a Cheney 2024 campaign, many of us became discouraged. Other people have issued blistering statements and saying, yeah, Liz Cheney is prioritizing taking out Trump because that's what matters. Trump's the only thing that matters. But that's what we've got from the Washington Post. Liz Cheney is angering even her own committee, and we'll see what their report looks like and what Schiff has to say about it. Of course, we'll continue to cover it. Thank you for liking this video, wherever it is you're watching it, and we'll follow along. We look forward to seeing you on the next one. All right, my friends, and so we've got a second segment. We're going to listen to some Supreme Court oral arguments, and there's some good stuff that we've got coming up, but let's get our bearings straight and get right into it. The Biden administration appearing in front of the Supreme Court to make their oral arguments to uphold a policy that came from this guy, Alejandro Mayorkas. He is the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, and he issued a very interesting memorandum that went out to all Border Patrol agents. Now, this is the subject of a Supreme Court case. This memo went out, and it's basically summarized in one sentence. It's a non-enforcement memo. It's telling Border Patrol, these are the guidelines on when you don't have to do your job because we've decided to prioritize certain levels of enforcement over other enforcement actions. So this memo went out. A bunch of litigation happened all over the country. This memo is on hold, and we're now in front of the United States Supreme Court to argue about this non-enforcement. Can Biden just decide to not enforce the law? We're just not going to enforce these immigration policies because it's too much work, it's too much money, it's not enough benefit for us. Yes or no? We're going to read the memo first before we listen to the arguments in front of the Supreme Court. Now, the U.S. government, of course, as we read through this, they're going to say, of course we're allowed to do this. Everything in this memo is perfectly legal. The states don't have standing. They can't challenge us. We're the federal government. We've got full supremacy over immigration. And also, the states aren't even being harmed by any of this. This is all a net positive for the states. They're just too stupid to realize it. We're the federal government. We know exactly how beneficial it is for us. But then we'll check in with the Texas Solicitor General, a guy by the name of Judd Stone, who's going to argue for the states and say, actually, yeah, this is a pretty catastrophic problem for us, and in Texas particular, because we take up about half the southern border. We'll hear from all of the judges, all weighing in, and there's some pretty spicy arguments, including Judge Kagan, who is telling the Solicitor General from Texas, that your answer is non-responsive to my question, sir. So we'll check in on that. But let's start with the letter that came out from the Department of Homeland Security. This is the non-prosecution letter. Drafted on September 30th, the memo is to everybody at Border Patrol, and you can see it is from Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Mayorkas signed off on the memo right here, communicating that these are the guidelines for enforcement of immigration law. And at the very top of this document, this is the note on the memo. It says, "Dear Border Patrol staff," right? This is going out to everybody. On June 10th, the U.S. District Court for Texas issued a final judgment that vacated this memo, said we can't even follow this. Accordingly, until further notice, ICE will not apply or rely on the Mayorkas memo in any manner, right? So this is all on hold. Now, the Biden administration is at the Supreme Court asking them to put it back into effect. And the states are saying, definitely leave this out because this is a catastrophe. Mayorkas was communicating to Border Patrol. This is what the memo says, and it's actually relatively short. We can fly through it pretty quickly. He says, okay, Border Patrol agents, listen up. I'm in charge now. This memo provides guidance about the apprehension and the removal of non-citizens. He says, now I'm grateful to you and other leaders of people in ICE for having this candor and openness of engagements. You've got a lot of talent and agency, and you're very great. You embody the ideals of our nation. However, I'm going to tell you why you're not allowed to do your job. You know, the thing that you care about, the thing that you've dedicated your life and career to, the thing that gives you passion. I'm going to wake up in the morning and go serve my country and protect the border and be a good citizen and a good participant in life. He's going to explain why you don't have to do that job anymore, why you can't do that job anymore. So he tells us, now it is well-established law that federal governments have broad discretion to decide who to arrest and not. Okay, this is about enforcement, about enforceability. Judge Scalia, who is, rest in peace, one of the best judges ever, died some time ago, but 12 years earlier, the Supreme Court emphasized that discretion resides with the government, right? And so think about this sort of from a practical matter. You've got a situation where you've got a prosecutor who is having to decide whether to bring charges against an individual. If they take a look at the case and they decide this is a pretty weak case, I'm not going to prosecute this person. How do you force them to go prosecute that person? How do you say, well, you have to do it? Because now you've got a prosecutor who's just like, well, I don't really want to do that. Right. And so we're talking about the discretion and whether the government has to do something and when this discretion applies. And if the prosecutor, if you take away that discretion and you say, I have to go prosecute that person, are they going to do it if they morally disagree with it? Right. And so we're weighing all of these different things. Mayorkas is explaining, we have discretion. He's explaining to all of his Border Patrol people. We've got more than 11 million undocumented, otherwise removable non-citizens. And so we've got a big bucket of people here we don't know what to do with. And so we need to exercise our discretion and determine whom to prioritize in immigration. And so in exercising our discretion, we have to be guided by the fact that a majority of these undocumented non-citizens could be contributing members of communities. They're frontline workers in COVID. They're teachers of faith. They do backbreaking farm work. They contribute in many, many meaningful ways. The fact that an individual is non-removable should not be the basis alone. And so justice and our country's well-being require it. So he says, by exercising our discretionary authority, we can focus our efforts on those who only focus on or are threats to the country. National security, public safety, all of that other stuff. So he's basically saying we're going to focus on the criminals, not on everybody else. So how does it work? These are our priorities. We establish these priorities to effectively achieve our goals. And he's sending this out to, probably wherever you work, you get a memo like this, right? We have team meetings at our office. We say, okay, everybody, this is how we're doing this now. Same thing. All right, so only focus on those who are threats to national security, those who are threats to public safety. Well, how do we know? Are they a threat or not to public safety? We have to ask ourselves about the gravity of the offense of the conviction. Okay, is this like a shoplifting candy bar charge, or is this somebody who is, abusing young children or something? The nature and the harm of the offense, the sophistication of the offense, the threat and use of a firearm or dangerous weapon, whether they've got serious prior criminal records. So essentially, Border Patrol agents, if you see this stuff, that's a red flag. We might want to favor enforcement. These are aggravating factors that we can use to go prosecute these people or to, in other words, detain them. But he's saying if they're not, right, the fact that they crossed the border alone, that's not criminal enough. That type of stuff is not in this list. They can have mitigating factors that favor declining enforcement actions. Advanced or tender age, which is nice, right? Advanced is a nicer word for old. The elderly. Lengthy presence in the United States. If they've been here a long time, maybe we don't want to detain them. If they've got mental conditions that might have contributed to their criminal conduct, same thing. If their status as a victim of a crime, mitigation. If we remove them, how is that going to impact their family or their younger children, presumably, or the people they care for? Immigration, non-citizens, whether they need humanitarian protection, military service, and so on and other things. Right. So all of this stuff is going to be either used to increase enforcement or to decrease enforcement. If they're a threat to the border, right, these are the factors. We also have to protect civil liberties and civil rights. And he talks about, it's basically a non-enforcement document, right? Implementation, this guidance is going to become effective 60 days after. This guidance is department-wide. Agency leaders, as to whom this guidance is relevant, all must sort of let this trickle down accordingly. It's not intended to create any rights and privileges and so on and so forth, okay? So the new Border Patrol manual is drafted. It hits the docket, and the states sue. They are going to now challenge this in the courts. So we're going to listen to both the Solicitor General, Elizabeth Prelogar, who is saying that, no, all of that, everything in that memo needs to stand. And in fact, the states have no standing, and this is all good for the states because it's all a net positive. We're going to listen to her make that argument in front of the Supreme Court right after we check in with our friends at 4patriots.com. As you know, a food shortage could be coming. Even in the United States, experts have written about this as recently as July. Drought, inflation, new policies, these are pushing America's food supply to its breaking point. And that's why survival food is more important now than ever. You can create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4Patriots survival food kits ever. This is not ordinary food. We're talking about good for 25 years, super survival food stuff, hand-packed right here in family-owned facilities in the United States. These give jobs to over 200 Americans. The kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water resistant, they stack easily. Many different delicious breakfast, lunches, and dinners. You can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. All you have to do is add boiling water, simmer, and serve. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and you can use promo code Robert to get 10% off your first purchase of anything in the store, including this 3-month survival food kit. You'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on anything over $97. Go to 4patriots.com, use code Robert to get 10% off this 3-month food survival kit. Start building your stockpile today. All right, and thank you to our friends at 4Patriots. Now, we read the memo from Mayorkas and the Department of Homeland Security, and now we're in front of the Supreme Court listening to these oral arguments. So the U.S. government wants the memo to remain. They're saying, hey, we have absolute right, total discretion to decide what's enforceable and what's not. And right after Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar got up in front of the Supreme Court, she started taking questions from the Chief Justice, John Roberts.
Linda R.S. argument under standing. Doesn't that mean that no state would ever have standing to challenge immigration policies concerning apprehension or removal of aliens?
So real quickly, I'll try to minimize my pausing, but I want to make sure that we don't start this too roughly so that we don't understand what they're talking about. But standing is the issue we've talked a lot about on this channel. It's the idea that you don't even have the right to bring a lawsuit. Okay, it's not about even necessarily the law or the outcome or the consequences, or in this case, enforceability or immigration. It's not about that at all. It's just about whether the state even has the right to sue. Can they even bring the claim in the first place? Because of course we know that general grievances, like general complaints against the government, you can't really sue for that, right? Like I have a big problem with taxes. Can I just file a lawsuit? I hate paying taxes. No, because that's a political question. That's something that I can vote on. I can advocate for, I can communicate about it, but I can't just file a general lawsuit. I don't have standing as a general taxpayer with a generalized grievance. So we're talking about these issues. And one issue with immigration is the feds are in charge of this stuff. So why can the states even sue in the first place? Chief Justice Roberts is asking the U.S. government about this because they say they can't sue.
Linda R.S. argument under standing. Doesn't that mean that no state would ever have standing to challenge immigration policies concerning apprehension or removal of aliens?
That's right. We think that the court articulated a principle there that an individual or a state doesn't have a judicially cognizable injury in seeking enforcement of the law against a third party.
Well, what about Biden against Texas?
The MPP case from last term?
4 months ago. Your position seems inconsistent with that to me.
Well, we did protest the state standing in that case as well. In the lower courts, we litigated that issue, and the Fifth Circuit and the district court ultimately rejected our arguments. We had also contested the state standing at the stay stage in this court, and the court ultimately declined to grant us stay relief and found that the states had a likelihood of success on the merits. And at that point, we went back to the drawing board and thought hard about these arguments and believe very strongly that the states here lack standing both under the kind of constitutional...
So you went from one argument to believing very strongly the other way.
This has been a through line. We have been protesting state standing, broad theories of state standing in the lower courts. And Mr. Chief Justice, the lower courts have not been accepting those arguments, but we think that the lower courts are fundamentally misunderstanding this court's precedents as it relates to our constitutional structure and the kind of...
I would have thought you'd have a little more concern about an opinion of ours that's 4 months old. I mean, it's not even out of the cradle yet, and you're throwing it under the bus.
No.
I kind of mixed the analogies there.
We certainly aren't suggesting that opinion should be thrown under the bus. We were obviously briefing these issues with multiple mistakes that we thought the district court had made in that case. But I don't think this is a jurisdictional principle, and I don't think that it would prevent the court here from recognizing that the kind of theories of state standing that the states here are pressing and that the lower courts are accepting would really remove every possible restriction that could exist in this space, and that's just fundamentally incompatible with both constitutional structure and the separation of powers.
Yeah, they're talking about this structure because, as we're going to see, they're concerned about the long-term effects of this. So, in law, oftentimes what we're thinking about is not even the case at hand, but the incentive and the disincentive structures that are created based upon the outcome of the case. So, in other words, if the states are found to have general standing in these types of situations, what Elizabeth Prelogar is concerned about is that with the snap of a finger, any state can just now have standing rights, right? They can just file a lawsuit against any type of complaint about immigration or anything that's generally in the purview of the federal government. If the states now have blanket standing, there's going to be lawsuits all over the place. They're going to be suing hand over fist, and that could cause some really big consequences. John Roberts is saying, well, your position on this was a little bit different in a prior case where there were state standing issues, and how do you reconcile those two cases? And she says, well, it's pretty simple, Judge. We're the federal government. We don't want the states to have standing anytime, under any shape and form, anywhere, because we think we should always win, more or less. And so he's kind of giving her a little bit of a tough time on this. But this is the way these arguments work, these oral arguments. It's less similar to what you see in the court of law, where you have opening arguments and closing arguments. Yes, the presenters, the people making the arguments, these attorneys, will have an opening statement, but they're often just cut off and they get interrupted by the judges and questioned by the judges. Different than what you see in court, where the judge, in a criminal trial, the judge is not really digging into people. They're just sort of moderating the two sides. So this is another sequence where Judge Sotomayor, who is a liberal judge, is teeing this one up. Sotomayor lobs a softball to Prelogar and says, can you explain to us how all of these memo policies, everything that Mayorkas communicated to the Border Patrol, how it actually helps the states, doesn't it?
Assuming, hypothetically, that I don't accept your argument, that a cost to a state could give it standing in certain situations. Judge Sutton, in a related case to this one, or a similar case to this one, pointed out, however, that under Arizona versus Wynn, we have said that if you're going to claim cost, you have to show us that it's a net cost. Could you address that as an alternative theory here?
Okay, so briefly on this, there's ideas that what the federal government is doing by not enforcing these policies is costing the state money, right? If the federal government won't take care of the border, Texas has to take care of the border. Well, guess what? That's coming out of Texas' pocket. And we're going to explore this some more. But Sotomayor is asking about the net costs. Okay, so maybe that costs Texas some money, right, to go and enforce the border. But by not enforcing the federal policy, they're saying that the state of Texas is going to get some other benefits, right? Actually, one of the benefits might come from the federal government. There's also going to be other people here who can get plugged back into the community. And these migrants who are not being deported and not being detained, right? They're actually going to go back into the community, and they may, generate some sales tax revenue. And there may be some incidental benefits that the society receives that is not being factored into the equation. And so what Sotomayor is now basically teeing this up, so Prelogar can answer, is yes, when you analyze all of the factors, this isn't a net cost to the states at all. If they come out and they say it costs us $50 million a year, $100 million a year, or whatever it is, no. It's a net benefit. And so she's teeing that up, and she's going to answer this quickly.
Yes, of course, Justice Sotomayor. And we think here, getting into the facts of this case, that there was no basis in this record to conclude that the states will actually incur these kinds of indirect effects on their own taxing or spending or regulating. The district court seemed to think that these enforcement priorities would suppress overall levels of enforcement, such that there would be the prospect that there might be additional non-citizens present in Texas. But if you look at how the enforcement priorities are intended to operate, this is not about reducing enforcement of the immigration laws. It's about prioritizing limited resources to say, go after person A instead of person B. And there is no reason to conclude that that's actually going to lead to less enforcement against individuals overall.
Suppose Congress passed a law that said that every person must buy 7 apples per week.
Before we get into Alito's commentary, right, she's saying that there is a net benefit, in other words, and the net cost argument is outweighed by the net benefit, and they haven't proven that there was, in fact, a net cost. So Alito is now going to sort of simplify this. Okay, take all of this out of the equation. Let's just talk about apples.
And 7. Suppose Congress passed a law that said that every person must buy 7 apples per week. And let's say I don't like apples, and the cost of 7 apples is, $8. And I say that's a pocketbook injury for me. So I have standing to challenge that. Do I have standing, or do I have to show that the net benefit to me, monetary benefit to me, of buying all these apples is that it will improve my long-term health? And so healthcare costs that I might have otherwise incurred, I'll avoid. By buying all these apples, if I buy them, I'll feel that I have to eat at least some.
So it's going to cost you something, right? You have to come out of pocket to buy all the apples. The government turns around and says, yeah, but that's not really that much of a cost to you, because the apples that you buy are going to make you healthier. And so you might spend $7 on 7 apples, but you're going to get $10 of health benefits from eating all the apples. And if you don't, by the way, right, because this is an individual, but if you don't get those benefits from eating those 7 apples, well, society will, right? Texas will get those benefits. And so it's not ultimately a cost, even if it feels like one.
I have to show net injury there.
Justice Alito, I acknowledge that in that hypothetical, no, you could challenge that regulation that is directly operating on you. But I think the problem for the states here is that they're asserting indirect harms. They're suggesting that there, through an attenuated chain of events, there is going to be perhaps the prospect of one additional non-citizen in their borders, and that's going to cause them harms. And there, I think we needed to
you've gone back to a
substantiate it.
different argument. I understood those to be 2 separate arguments. You have the direct indirect argument, and you have the net cost argument.
Well, here, I think I was
Well,
trying
I'm
to
talking
engage
about
on whether the district court could have reasonably concluded that there would be that kind of actual out-of-pocket expense for the states. And I was trying to make the overarching point that that's not how these enforcement priorities work in the first place. But even on the specific conclusions that the district court reached, we think that the findings were fundamentally flawed.
So clearly erroneous?
Yes.
To agree
Amy
with you, we
Coney-Barrett.
have to find, because you didn't talk a lot about the clearly erroneous standard in your brief, so I wondered whether you were saying that the district court's factual findings were clearly erroneous, or that the district court made an error of law because it didn't offset burdens with benefits.
No, we are arguing that these factual findings are clearly erroneous. And I recognize that the court infrequently delves into facts like these, but I guess what I would say is that if any facts are clearly erroneous, it's these facts, and it's not hard to see on the record why. The district court committed really 2 independent errors here. The first thing is that it looked at the wrong time frame. It focused on fiscal year 2021 to suggest that the states had incurred costs, but that was a time period before these guidelines even took effect, and so it was improper to draw those kinds of causal errors based on that data. But
So she's diving into the specific facts that the states are alleging here, right? So not only is the costs that the states are alleging not net costs, okay, it's you buy $7 of apples, you get $10 of health benefits, but it's also the state's saying that those $7 of costs in the apples, it's not actually $7. She's like, they're saying it costs $7. But no, it's like $1 or like 50 cents maybe.
even putting that to the side and looking at the data, it doesn't support the district court's analysis. The court said DHS is not detaining the same number of criminal non-citizens. But the very chart that the district court included at JA 314 shows that over the time in question, the number of criminal non-citizens in custody remained essentially unchanged. And then with respect to removals, the district court said DHS has done far less enforcement action with removals and focused on a comparison between fiscal year 2019, about 250,000 removals, and fiscal year 2021, where there were about 55,000.
Yeah.
But the district court ignored entirely that
So
that was during
explain.
the pandemic, and the CDC's public health order under Title 42 was in effect, and DHS excluded more than 1 million non-citizens under the Title 42 order. So the bottom line conclusion here that there was less immigration enforcement overall, I think, was clear error.
Yeah, so we're talking numbers now. We're sort of manipulating the numbers around, and you can see how the government is making these arguments. Okay, it's a net benefit. The states don't have any standing, and the costs are not actually the real costs. They are, in fact, a lot less because DHS and others are reporting differently. So that's Elizabeth Prelogar. She represents the government. Next up, we've got the Texas Solicitor General. So Texas responds, and I've got a couple clips from this one as well. The Texas Solicitor General, Judd Stone, he starts his arguments, and he is immediately questioned by Sotomayor and the 3 liberal judges from the Supreme Court. Let's listen.
But it's your burden to show standing, right?
So this is that is Amy Coney-Barrett, and she's asking him about standing. So he takes the podium, and she says, okay, well, the government said that you don't have standing. And he says, well, on the standing argument, he starts to talk about it, and Amy Coney says, it's your burden of proof. In other words, the government doesn't have to prove or disprove your standing. Since you're the ones who are bringing this complaint, you're the ones who are demanding the memo gets reversed. The presumption is the memo is valid. You've got to prove that you've got standing to get past that first hurdle, to show that this is not just a generalized grievance. Like you're just not that taxpayer complaining about taxes. Do you have a basis? Asks Amy Coney-Barrett.
But it's your burden to show standing, right?
Yes, Your Honor, and we did by, again, findings supported by clear error showing the causal relationship between actual enforcement actions and this memorandum, including, for example, 22 emails specifically citing the guidelines as a reason for removing detainers.
But why isn't the causal relationship, the chain, broken in the sense that you have voluntary decision-making by Texas, say, in relation to the criminal justice costs?
Okay, so she asks a very convoluted question. Let me just explain it, and then we'll listen to her ask this question. She's saying, okay, if the state of Texas decides that they're going to go incur costs, like the federal government is not enforcing the law, we have migrants pouring across month after month in insane numbers. Ketanji is saying, well, hold on a minute here. If Texas decides that they just want to go hire, law enforcement people, or if they want to go mitigate this, if they want to go enforce their own border, and they incur those costs, isn't that a voluntary decision? In other words, that's Texas. Texas just made the decision to do that. That's not the federal government doing anything at all. So why should you have the ability to go and demand the federal government do something when in fact they're not doing anything, they're just not doing something, and you have made the decision to go incur those costs on your own? Why is that the federal government's fault?
That you feel compelled or you want to go after individual people. In other words, aren't the costs associated with Texas's decision to incarcerate or parole certain non-citizens if the federal government decides not to detain them, aren't those a result of the state's own policy choices in a way, that we have recognized or decided is not sufficient in a case like Pennsylvania versus New Jersey?
Your Honor, I think ordinarily in the court's Article 3 standing analysis, for example, in the DACA case in Regents, the court didn't go, well, California is suffering this injury in the first place because they have chosen to employ individuals subject to this immigration right, et cetera. And so really, to some extent, the loss of these individuals is a self-inflicted injury. More to the point, Texas suffers injuries regardless of what it does, whether it detains, releases, or paroles individuals, because we have not only law enforcement costs, but social services costs and very serious threats of recidivism.
Well, all right, well, separate out the can we just for a second separate out the criminal justice costs from the health care and other things that would be required? With respect to the criminal justice costs, presumably, first of all, the federal government has said that they've determined that these particular individuals aren't going to be a high risk, and so that's why they're not detaining them. So why isn't Texas's determination to detain them on Texas? I mean, presumably there'll be other states that might agree with the federal government and say, we're not going to expend any money to try to supervise or detain these particular individuals.
Well, 2 points, Your Honor. First of all, there are district court findings of fact. This was a disputed subject at the trial court regarding whether or not the rates of recidivism were acceptably high, what kinds of risk Texas was exposed to by these releases. And more to the point, Congress has made the determination, specifically in the passage of IIRA and 1226C, whether or not these individuals are unacceptably high.
Well, that's on the merits. That's a merits question. I mean, I guess my point is just in terms of injury and who is bearing the cost and why.
Okay, so she's teasing out all of these issues. Do you see what she's doing? So she said, okay, separate the costs of social welfare, healthcare, schools, all that other stuff. Let's just talk about criminal justice. And he says, well, all right, so the costs are, he explained the litany. We've got a whole bunch of facts that were included at the lower level district court. And they're trying to explore the bounds of the arguments. But Ketanji, when he starts to talk about the statute, the law that says Congress actually has to enforce, right? Congress passed a law saying the executive branch has to enforce the law. You heard her say that phrase, merits. Okay, well, that goes back to a different issue. We're not talking about that issue yet. We're just exploring this one issue of costs because we're on this net costs conversation. And she gets joined by the other two judges here shortly. We have Kagan, who makes an appearance, and Sotomayor chimes in as well.
Isn't it Texas's determination to go after and detain or keep detained these people, a cost that Texas has chosen to incur? The guidelines don't require states to keep these people in custody?
No, Your Honor. I think that's because Texas is put to what we might call sort of an Article 3 dilemma, where it either pays the costs of continued detention or pays the costs that are incurred through recidivism. Again, recidivism in this case being a hotly contested question at trial, upon which there were direct testimony from one of the largest counties in Texas regarding the criminal population there, actual evidence of recidivism by specific individuals who had been detained and released pursuant to
All
detainment.
right, so can we answer Justice Sotomayor?
So she didn't like that question. So she asks about the criminal justice costs, and he gives her a whole list. Yeah, we've got counties, we've got states, recidivism, we got them all. What else do you want? And she says, all right, we'll go back over to Kagan's question then.
Laura's question about net cost then. So fine, there might be costs with respect to this group of people,
Yeah.
but the federal government says that you're going to save a whole lot based on other aspects of the operation of the guidelines. What's your response to that?
Two responses to that question. The first,
This is you get $10 of benefits from the $7 of apples that they're forced to spend. She's asking him to respond to that now.
Justice Sotomayor's question about net cost then. So fine, there might be costs with respect to this group of people, but the federal government says that you're going to save a whole lot based on other aspects of the operation of the guidelines. What's your response to that?
two responses to that question. The first is somewhat straightforward, which is to say that's in the nature of a factual assertion about which the petitioners offered zero evidence whatsoever. That was a disputed fact question at trial. They offered no evidence. If there were in fact evidence, I think that would be powerful evidence attacking our standing. Their assertions afterwards
I'm
are
sorry,
not a kind of evidence.
you have to prove standing.
Sotomayor chiming
And
in.
we have said in Arizona,
It was her question originally.
the Arizona case, that you have to show the net effect, and you didn't. You didn't show, I mean, what the government has said and what the record clearly proves is that there's been a surge at the border. If left unattended, that surge would overwhelm all of the border states, not just Texas. And that the cost of doing that has to give them greater priorities in terms of aliens who are already here. But we know that many of those people coming in will be risks to the state of Texas, et cetera. Why haven't you shown that that net effect of keeping more people out is going to mean less than the few people that they decide to erroneously let go?
Respectfully, Your Honor, I think there's 2 points here. One is that this court doesn't typically treat standing as an accounting exercise as to whether or not an
No,
individual
but you have to show, you can't look at a piece of a policy and say, I don't like a piece. You have to look at the policy altogether.
Certainly, Justice Sotomayor, what we are looking at here is a very specific challenge to the exercise of detention authority under two sections. I don't think it's an Article 3 vice that Texas isn't challenging the entire immigration code's application in all cases.
General, do you think that there's any immigration
Kagan.
policy that you could not challenge under the way you view standing?
All right, so this is Judge Kagan. Judge Kagan is up here. And so we've got the three lefty judges who are all chiming in, right? We've got all on the right here. Questions started with Ketanji, then it jumped over to Sotomayor, started with the criminal justice stuff. Then we jumped over to Sotomayor, where she was telling us about net effect of costs. And she's asking, again, we're going again back to the standing issue. Why do the states have the argument? Why are you even here in the first place? If it's actually a benefit for you, if we make you buy 7 apples, but you get $10 of benefit, well, and why are you here? And so now what Kagan is asking is, can you just sue for whatever you want? Can you just literally just file a lawsuit and challenge any immigration policy? Is that what you're saying? Because if that's true, that opens up a whole big Pandora's box now. All the states are going to sue for anything.
In all cases.
General, do you think that there's any immigration policy that you could not challenge under the way you view standing?
I think that's hard to discuss in the abstract. There might well be, Your Honor, but it shouldn't come as
It's hard to think of, I guess, is what I'm saying. I mean, if all you need to do is to say we have $1 worth of costs, and you don't even need to think about the benefits on the other side. I mean, every immigration policy, you let in more people, you let in fewer people, is going to have some effect on a state's fiscal condition.
So in other words, you can't only look at the bad stuff. You can't only come in here with your costs for education and criminal law and healthcare and discount all of the other things, like these people who are, engaging in commerce and, going and purchasing goods and delivering services and paying sales tax and all of the other things. You have to consider this holistically. And if you just come in here and we set a standard at the Supreme Court that the whole country has to follow, right? I mean, whatever the standard is here, all the other circuits, all the other federal courts, everybody's going to follow it. And Kagan's saying, well, if you just show up here and you've got $1 of damages, we have to hear your case.
Maybe they'll get less or more tax dollars. Maybe they'll have to spend less or more money. I mean, every single immigration policy. And then, not to mention all the other policies in the world, that if a state comes in and says, I got $1 worth of costs that I can show you, I mean, we're just going to be in a situation where every administration is confronted by suits by states that can, bring a policy to a dead halt, to a dead stop, by just showing $1 worth of costs?
2 points, Your Honor. The first is, and I can't speak for all states, obviously, even though 37 of them are participating in this case and none have adopted the United States' theory of standing. Texas has more than half of the southern border.
It's not responsive to my question.
Oh,
yes, Your Honor.
I mean, look, and this isn't...
So I want to pause on this because she got into him on that one. She's asking him about the floodgates opening. What happens if we set this new standard and all the other states just say, I've got $1 of damage. Joe Biden, you're sued now. And he says, right, listen to his response. He says, well, we're also joined by 37 other states. Justice. So maybe this is a pretty big problem, right? It's not like it's just one state. They're like, don't single Texas out, right? It's not Texas coming in here with a $1 claim. Like, oh, I slipped and hurt my back. Oh, I need help. No, this is a big issue. And there's a bunch of other states who are right here with us. And so he is sort of jabbing that, right? Without saying that. And she lets him have it. Says that is not responsive.
Costs?
2 points, Your Honor. The first is, and I can't speak for all states, obviously, even though 37 of them are participating in this case and none have adopted the United States' theory of standing. Texas has more than half of the southern border.
It's not responsive to my question.
Yes, Your Honor.
Texas... I mean, look, and this isn't anything that has to do with this administration. Some other administration will come in and the California Solicitor General will be standing where you are. And, there's an issue here, especially with respect to immigration policy. Immigration policy is supposed to be the zenith of federal power, and it's supposed to be the zenith of executive power. And instead,
got it
we're
all
creating
covered.
a
We
system
do whatever we want.
where a combination of states and courts can bring immigration policy to a dead halt.
2 points, Your Honor. The first is, again...
So you see him slowing down. If you listen to his cadence, he's giving her some breathing room because he can tell she's a little bit hot. So he's taking it calming down and responding.
Speaking at least for Texas, it shouldn't be particularly surprising that we would suffer outsized Article 3 injuries, given the fact that half of the southern border immediately abuts Texas.
You're not saying that you have a special kind of injury here. You're saying all the usual rules apply, maybe more than the usual rules, and all you need to show is $1 worth of costs.
We are indeed saying the usual rules apply with one twist, which is to the extent the usual rules don't apply, immigration surely is the kind of sort of sovereign prerogative that in the sense of Massachusetts versus EPA, Texas has had to surrender to the union as a part of the state of joining the union. And Texas has been given a procedural right, just like in Massachusetts versus EPA, to vindicate those interests that it has had to surrender to the federal government. So
I guess what strikes me is that these very broad arguments that the Solicitor General was making, maybe we shouldn't, even if we don't think that we should accept them as broad prohibitions, the fact that you are not the party directly regulated, the fact that you are challenging an enforcement action, particularly an enforcement action where the most discretion has been given to executive officials. But those form the backdrop by which we should say, it's just not enough that you're coming in here with a set of speculative possibilities about your costs. You have to do more than that, given the backdrop of what has become, I think, a system that nobody ever thought would occur, which is that the states can go into court at the drop of a pin and stop federal policies in their tracks.
It's not the drop of a pin. There's a literal invasion happening at the southern border, and it's been going that way for quite some time. Pretty bad. So, you can see how these arguments go, right? We all, I don't know what the rest of the country sees, but in Arizona, Texas, right, these border states, it's probably like a different country than I don't know, Connecticut or something. But it's pretty interesting, right? Now suddenly an argument by 37 states is looked at like they're just complaining about a $1 issue. Now, the next clip that we have from the Supreme Court's an interesting one. It comes from Kavanaugh. And Kavanaugh asks about a very important concept, which is about enforceability, right? Doesn't really matter what happens here. If the Supreme Court finds that the memo is invalid, right? So they can't use that memo to basically non-enforce the border. Then what happens? What does Mayorkas do? Did the Border Patrol agents override the directive of their boss because the Supreme Court says that they could? Does Mayorkas begrudgingly impose these new policies? Right? How does it function? That's what Kavanaugh wants to know.
To tie this up, I'm sorry, is if you prevail here, what will happen? That's a concern because I'm not sure much will change because they don't have the resources to change. So what do you envision? I know Florida's amicus brief says, well, the executive will then strive to meet its obligations. Strive to is not a usual term of a judicial order. So what do you think happens if you prevail here?
We think, consistent with the district court's findings, that individual officers and ICE will go back to not believing that their enforcement discretion has been restrained in the ways the prosecutorial, the guidelines, the memos have caused that to be. More specifically about the lack of resources, though, Your Honor, there's an on-the-record finding of bad faith in this specific context for two reasons. One, here petitioners have repeatedly sought to decrease their enforcement capabilities, to decrease their detention capabilities, and two, they've persistently underused them.
Okay. Why don't you go to Justice Sotomayor?
Counsel, I don't know that I understand your theory, but maybe I'm getting it.
So basically his first argument was it's to enable the Border Patrol to recognize that their non-enforceability memo is just invalid so that they can continue to do their job as it was originally detailed to them. And that's going to be sufficient, right? They're still going to have the resource problem. Like that's not going away anytime soon. So they're just going to go back to the original enforcement memo. That's the policy that they're going to follow.
Number one, you're saying there is no command to remove anyone who falls under 1226 and 1231?
We're certainly not saying that there is, Your Honor, whether
All
or
right,
not...
you're saying there's complete and absolute discretion for the government to say, anybody charged with any crime, we're not going to remove you.
I'm not sure that I'd concede that much, but we're certainly not arguing otherwise.
All right, so what are you arguing? Are you arguing that only if they are told that there's a criminal who fits the 1226C or 1231 conditions that they must remove those people?
Our argument doesn't run to removal at all, Justice Sotomayor.
All right,
It runs
so
to arrest
why
and
isn't
detention.
the policy guidelines exactly what the government said, which is this has nothing to do with detention, it has to do with removal? We've made a decision that certain categories of people, we're not going to spend the money on giving them a notice of appearance or removing them.
Well, Your Honor, in part because the guidelines on their face and 1226C contains an arrest requirement. We believe that's the natural reading of taken into custody. But the guidelines on their face refer to individuals who should be subject to arrest, detainers, and removal proceedings.
It should be, but you just said to me they don't have to be.
There's discretion.
The government has the discretion to say, I don't want to remove this person, correct?
I apologize, Justice. I was referring to how this does affect detainers. I agree, once again, we are not seeking to have any individual been specifically
So
removed.
really this case is all about the people that a detainer has been put on and that the government can't withdraw that detainer once they put it on?
This case is about under two different.
Answer the yes or no to that. Is that because there's a lot of states, for example, that don't cooperate with ISIS, and they don't tell the government about somebody, but maybe the government found out about it. Do they have to go and put the detainer on that person?
The answer to your previous question is no. The answer to this question is yes.
All right, so they have to go and spend the resources to sit outside of that prison and find out what day that person is going to be released so they can arrest that person that day?
1226D actually directs the federal government to create a 24-hour accessible system for purposes of having this.
I just asked you a direct question. Does the government now have to put the resources in place to watch the prison every day to see if someone's been released?
The government must attempt to fulfill its mandatory detention. How it does in terms of individual resource expenditure.
You just told me something contradictory.
So saying that the government has discretion, right, to decide whether to detain. She kind of was trying to get him to agree to two different things, right? The government does have discretion because there's precedent for this, but also the government has an obligation under a different provision to actually detain people because that's been mandated in Congress. So those were the oral arguments that took place, all out of the Supreme Court. Of course, they will issue a ruling. It is a 6-3 court. So, you know, I think you can probably weigh in on this. Very likely that the conservative justices will find some way to allow the states to exercise standing, I would imagine, and make a claim. But we'll, of course, wait and see. When the ruling comes out, we'll very likely cover it. And I hope you join us as we do. Thank you for subscribing wherever it is you're watching this. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. All right, my friends, we've got one final segment. And it'll be a little bit shorter while we wrap it up. And we're going to talk about this this individual. He's fluid. This individual is gender fluid. So I think that we're good with some interchangeability here. But let's get right into it. Sam Brinton, a Biden administration nuclear waste employee, was arrested. Criminal complaint coming out of Minnesota for stolen luggage. And what's interesting about this person is their bio, the information that they posted when they got this new job in the Biden administration. Now, this person put this on Twitter, and this is what they communicated. Sam Brinton said, "It's official, America. As of June 19th, I now serve my nation as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Spent Fuel and Waste Disposition in the Office of Nuclear Energy in the Department of Energy." This is coming over from Sam Brinton on Twitter, at S Brinton, hashtag nuclear nerd, on waste, Department Assistant Secretary at the Department of Energy. Posts are not official statements. Pronouns are they and them. All right. And on that note, right, this is what this photograph of this individual posted. And I'm not interested in this individual's personal life or whatever, whatever they're into, not interested in it. But I do think, in all seriousness, that this introduces a very interesting defense. It will make sense as we carry on. But here is what Sam says. Sam says, due to the concern of negative and threatening responses like we saw in my previous announcement, including more than 100 death threats and more vitriol than I could have imagined, I held off on announcing my official start until I could be safe and secure in my new role. But goodness, is this a time for celebration? Sam says it's really, really official. The beautiful irony that the months-long process of getting me into this role culminated in a Pride Month start date is not lost on me. As one, if not the very first openly gender-fluid individuals in federal government leadership, I was welcomed with open arms into the Department of Energy all the way up to the secretary, whom I shared the stage with in a Pride celebration month just today. To clarify, Sam says, I'm not a Biden appointee, despite what was reported, and instead serve as a career employee in the senior executive service. I intend to be serving my country in this role through many, many presidencies. I prepared for this moment in a technical sense for a decade, graduating with not 1 but 2 degrees from MIT, led it working to multiple think tanks where I produced the first of its kind report on maps on consent-based sitting and advanced reactor innovation. Says, being the first employee of one of the world's first nuclear waste startup companies led me to innovate and drive the national conversation about nuclear waste. And now I lead a staff of hundreds. Wow, that's a pretty big position. Leads a staff of hundreds and a budget of millions. And with a nuclear waste fund, I'm responsible for at least over $45 billion. Woo! $45 billion? As the leader of the office overseeing the management of the nation's spent nuclear fuel. Wow, that's a pretty big position, it sounds like. Wow. Sam says, thank you for being the community who believed in me. You got me through some dark days these past few months. I'm eternally grateful. Now it's time for me to make my mark as the Deputy Assistant Secretary. All right. All right, so that is Sam Brinton at the Nuclear Energy Department in the U.S. federal government. All right. Well, unfortunately for Sam was charged with crimes, allegations, and as always, right, everybody that we talk about here charged with crimes deserves the presumption of innocence. I'm a 100% believer in that, 100 million% believer in that, and due process and equal protection of the law. And this is an interesting complaint because, as we know, Sam is gender fluid. And that introduces some interesting defenses that we might not otherwise have in a case where a defendant is not gender fluid. Let's piece this together. Coming out of the 4th Judicial District, the state of Minnesota, county of Hennepin, Minnesota versus Samuel Brinton, date of birth 9/11, 1987. It's an unfortunate birthday. The complaint, right, this is all public record now. The complaint submits that this complaint to the court says that there is probable cause to believe the following: that Sam stole some property, theft, under Minnesota statute 609.5.2a. Maximum penalty, 5 years prison, $10,000 or more in fines, maximum level offense. It's a felony. This happened on or about 9/16/2022, just a few days after Sam's birthday. The charge says on or about 9/16 in Hennepin County, Minnesota, Sam Brinton intentionally and without claim of right took movable property belonging to a victim without consent and with the intent to deprive the owner permanently of the property. So we're talking about intent. And in criminal law, we have two parts of criminal convictions in terms of assembling elements necessary to support the conviction. Remember, we've got two things we talk about: a mens rea and an actus reus. We have the mens rea, which is the guilty mind, a person's mindset, and we have the actual action. So in this case, let's see if we can identify all the components. The criminal complaint against Sam says that the complainant, the government, the police officer, the investigator, has investigating, and we have found the following. They write, on September 16th, law enforcement at Minneapolis Airport, which is located in Hennepin County, Minnesota, were alerted to a missing suitcase in the baggage claim area. Oh man, don't you get nervous when you don't see your bag? You think somebody ran off with it. The victim, a known adult female, stated that she and her son flew into the airport on Delta from New Orleans. They went to baggage carousel number 7 to claim her checked bag, and it was a navy blue hard-sided Vera Bradley 26-inch roller bag. The bag was scanned at arriving at 1640 hours, but it was missing from the carousel. Law enforcement obtained the video surveillance for the carousel. At 1645, officers observed the suspect, who was later identified as Sam, named as the defendant in this case. They watched him remove a navy blue hard-sided roller bag from the rear of Carousel 7. Defendant removed the bag's tag and put the bag tag in the handbag that they were carrying. Uh-oh. It's a pretty bad fact. So removed the other person's identifier tag and put it in a handbag that they were carrying. Defendant then left the area at a quick pace. Police took a digital photo of the bag removed by the defendant, showed it to the victim, who said, "Yeah, that's my bag." Law enforcement confirmed that Sam arrived at the airport on American Airlines flight, a different flight, not Delta, hours from Washington, D.C., coming in from maybe the Department of Energy. They were able to track Sam's movements throughout the airport. After Sam took the blue bag from Carousel 7, Sam is observed leaving the airport in a rideshare vehicle along with the Vera blue bag. Records from the American Airlines confirm that the defendant did not check a bag when they departed Washington, D.C. to Minnesota. Police learned later that Sam was staying at an Intercontinental hotel. Video surveillance showed the defendant checking in with the blue bag. Now, defendant returned to the airport on September 18th. Surveillance shows the defendant checking the blue bag for a departing flight back to D.C. Ugh. Victim, the person whose bag it belonged to, subsequently provided an itemized list for the contents of the bag, the total coming to $2,325, $2,000, $325. The police officer obtained video surveillance from the defendant traveling on October 9th, got to Washington Dulles, return trip from Europe, was carrying the navy blue hard-sided roller bag. Cops showed a close-up picture of the bag to the victim, who said, "Yep, that's my missing bag." So the cops are following this bag all over the place, right? It's not just this, Sam has taken it now to another country. On October 9th, the police called the defendant to speak about the incident. Cops said, "Dear Sam, just wondering, did you take anything from the airport that you shouldn't have taken?" Sam says, "Not that I know of." Sam later admitted to taking the bag, but denied that clothes for another individual were inside. Defendant said, "If I had taken the wrong bag, I'm happy to return it, but I don't have any clothes for another individual. That was my clothes when I opened the bag." Defendant confirmed having the blue bag. Approximately 2 hours later, Sam called the police back. Sam apologized for not being, quote, completely honest. Ugh! Darn it! Makes it a lot harder when you call the cops and admit everything. Defendant admitted to taking the blue bag, but stated that they were tired and they took the suitcase thinking it was theirs. Now, that's the defense strategy that you'd use, right? This individual is gender fluid, right, by their own nature. And so you can imagine a situation where an individual who is dynamic in gender thinks that they've got what, they're in one mode, I guess, and maybe they change. So like, I'm not trying to be like insulting to anybody out there, but like as a defense attorney, a defense strategy, what are you creating? What type of argument are you creating in a unique situation like this? The argument goes to intent. The only way you're going to defend this case is to say this individual did not have the intent to take the suitcase, right? The suitcase was clearly taken. They've got this person on actus reus, all flying all over the world. So the only defense now comes back to intent. The argument would be that Sam got on the airplane thinking that he was, one version of something, or an individual who was in one mode, got off the airplane, thought that that bag was his, right? That that was actually who he was. That was another person. That's the intent. If he didn't have the intent, if he really didn't think that it was his bag, then that eviscerates that element. Now, the problem for Sam is that Sam is admitting, right, several times that he actually took their suitcase because he was tired, which is a big problem. The other big problem is the fact that he actually removed the blue bag's tag and put the bag roller in the handbag. That's a really bad fact. So it sort of doesn't matter what his intent is, because that negates that original intent. You could say, yeah, I was confused. I thought that bag was mine. I got a similar looking bag. It sort of matches the gender identity of the individual, right? That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say is you can get on, depending on your fluidity and how fluid you are. And I don't know how quickly this stuff changes or, whatever it is, but you can imagine a person who is confused, right? People make mistakes. People accidentally do take other people's bags all the time. People's bags look like they're black, and if they're all black bags, it's a black bag. You pick a bag up, check the label. It's not mine. Problem here is he checked the label and it wasn't his or theirs, right? It wasn't their bag. And so now that sort of negates that intent element. So yeah, it's going to be a tough case. Not going to be an easy one. Now, that's a good reminder, as a general rule. Rule number 1 of the 1, 2, 3 rule, I don't answer those questions. If a cop calls you and says, hey, did you take anything that didn't belong to you? You say, I don't answer those questions. Who the heck is this? Why are you calling me? And you definitely don't call them back and say, hey, guess what? I'm guilty of everything. Call a lawyer first. Okay, Sam screwed up. You should call a lawyer first. R&R Law Group available online, rrlawaz.com, helping good people charged with crimes in the state of Arizona find safety, clarity, and hope. Yeah, and on locals, JC says, I don't even answer the phone. So that's even a better defense. Also good defense. Defendants said that when they opened the bag at the hotel, they realized it was not theirs. Defendant got nervous. People would think they stole the bag and did not know what to do. Stated they left the clothes from the bag inside the drawers in the hotel room. Defendant admitted to taking the blue bag back to the airport on September 18th and checking the bag that did not belong to the defendant. Cops further questioned defendant on why the check bag on September 18th, and the defendant responded that they did not want to leave the bag in the hotel room, reasoning that it was weirder to leave a bag than clothes. Right. So while the cop is going into this, the cop is saying, okay, you didn't mistake anything. You didn't think those were your clothes. You didn't think it was your bag. You wanted the bag. You took the bag. It's a nice luxury bag. So you brought it to your hotel. You ditched all the clothes out of there and you just kept the bag. The officer instructed the defendant on how they could return the bag to Delta to ensure it goes back to the victim. As of the date of filing this complaint, the victim has not received the bag. Your complaint, the police learned that no clothing was recovered from the hotel room. Clothes are all gone. Now, complaint requests the defendant, subject to bail, is arrested, right? And of course, he was arrested. Prosecuting attorney is named Casey out of Minnesota. Individual got a summons. Court date appeared October 26. And there's some more details about the statute in question. So, yeah, interesting complaint, right? And the 1, 2, 3 rule certainly would have saved him. I don't answer those questions. Get a lawyer is the right response. But, I was thinking about a defense for him. And since he made that call, made a bunch of admissions, he sort of made it a little bit more difficult on himself. But the question is, what's the future going to look like for the Department of Energy? And they are not responding. This is over from Exchange Monitor. A Department of Energy spokesperson declined to comment via email. Brinton did not immediately reply to a comment as well. Brinton's lawyers also did not respond to comment. His lawyer's name is Fabian Hoffner. Brinton's been on leave from the Department of Energy for at least a month, the agency has said. On November 18th, Kim Petrie is the acting deputy assistant secretary for spent fuel, stood in for Brinton, wrote in an email to colleagues at the Department of Energy. She says, for the foreseeable future, the head of spent fuel is going to be Catherine Huff, Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy. Says, I should have another update for all of you in a month or so. That timetable corresponds with Brinton's scheduled hearing in the Hennepin County District Court in Minneapolis. So it sounds like our Department of Energy is in a little bit of disarray here. their fearless leader, Sam, is not in charge anymore because he's on leave attending to his court proceedings. So an interesting case that we'll probably not continue to follow. All right, so don't subscribe if you want to follow this story because that's it on this one. But if you want to cover other stories and follow along, certainly hit that subscribe button and follow along on those. But that, my friends, is it for us on the show. We covered some interesting stuff. Definitely covered the arrest out of our Department of Energy. Some very interesting arguments out of the Supreme Court with our useless Department of Homeland Security Secretary. And the Republicans have said, it's our turn soon. We're going to be coming in soon, baby. But that is it for us, my friends. We're going to see what you have to say about all of this over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com if you want to check that out. But first, let's see what you had to say on the YouTube Super Chats, because I saw some of those coming in. And I saw our friend Eddie Oliver probably yelling at me again, probably, blaming me for something, which mostly my fault. But I definitely saw some others come in. And so let's hit these up. We've got Molly Dolly's in the house, who started the show with a nice dono, says, if Garland is in charge of referrals, won't he just laugh at them from Republicans? I wonder if these are a waste of time and effort. It's a great question. And that's on that first segment, Molly. Yeah, I think that honestly, yes, like that is the reality, is they'll all get referred over. The DOJ will do nothing with them. If the Republicans win the White House, maybe that will change, right? Because they'll be in charge of the DOJ. But the double standard will be so obvious, right? If a House committee sends a subpoena and the DOJ doesn't do anything with that, but they did with all the J6 subpoenas, it's going to be, the double standard is going to be deafening. It's going to be so loud, it's going to be deafening. Thanks for the super chat, Molly. Jenny B says, Piglosi fired, Shifty's panicking, and Kinzinger's crying, Cheney's hiding an investigation into Biden lying. A good day. Smiley face from Jenny B. Piglosi fired, Shifty panicking, Kinzinger crying, Cheney hiding an investigation into Biden lying. It's almost like a Christmas jingle or something. Says the U.S. beat Iran to qualify in the knockout round. I saw the headline on that, but I haven't been following the World Cup. But thank you, Jenny, for that. It looks like it's been fun, actually. I'm sorry I'm not into it. Brian says states have standing under Article 4, Section 4. Well, in the Supreme Court, they were arguing that they don't. That's the liberal justices. I certainly think that the states have a right to petition their government for a redress of grievances. It's insane to me to think that the states can't. What do you want the states to do then? Leave? If the border is massively broken and the states can't file a lawsuit, what should they do? Just leave the country? Maybe. Crash says, letting in millions of non-tax-paying illegals and being forced to support them with public services welfare is not the same as being forced to buy 8 apples a week. These people are galaxy-brained. Yeah, and that was Alito, right? He's making that example so that we can sort of simplify the issues, right? Because these are complex issues. You're talking about all these different complicated, statutes and different moving parts. And so it does become very complicated. And he was giving us the Apple analogy just to simplify things for us. Crash says, look at the freak out from DeSantis sending just 50 illegals to Martha's Vineyard. They were promptly taken away to the military base by the feds. Yeah, it was an absolute meltdown. And in fact, they're, I think, investigating him for that. Like the DOJ, they're talking about that. Better believe it. If Ron DeSantis announces all of the same stuff that you saw coming after Trump is going to come after him too, because that's the new lawfare reality we're living in. Eddie Oliver is here, says, hey, Rob, you noticed the case was Texas versus U.S., not Arizona versus Texas. I know. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed by our state. I got to tell you, I really am. It's like, what the heck happened here? I think the rest of the country is embarrassed for us too. Rightfully so. We're not even suing anybody. And in Texas, they are. Says, we had to do it because you AZ guys can't even count votes. Do better, Rob. Do better. And yes, I still hold you personally responsible for everything. See, I told you he was going to do it. And that's fair. I live in Arizona. I'm an Arizona citizen. So Eddie Oliver says, I also think Sam Brinton is from Arizona too. What do you think of that, Rob? What do you think of that, Rob? Well, I don't know. I don't know if he's from here or not. That's an interesting development. I don't really have anything to think of any of that, Eddie. I'm just going to leave that one there. But thank you for your tremendous support, Eddie, from the great state of Texas. And those were it for the super chats on YouTube, my friends. Thank you for being generous with those. Yes, I do think we got all of those. All right. And so that, my friends, is going to be it for us on the program. Let's see what else we have here. Let's see if we have a couple locals comments that we can just hit before we wrap it up. Yeah, how do we want to do this? All right, so what we'll do, my friends, is we will wrap it up right here, and we'll stick around on locals for just a few minutes because I got to get out the door. But I want to thank you for being a part of this tremendous broadcast. It wouldn't be possible without you. We're going to hang out for quickly on watchingthewatchers.locals.com for just a quick goodbye. But thank you, everybody who was here and supported us. Thank you to the sponsors who support the show. Big shout outs to our friends at Goldco. Protect your retirement with gold and silver. Go to robertlikesgold.com. Also, please don't starve to death out there, okay? Food shortages. We need survival food, survival supplies. Get yours today at fortpatriots.com. Use promo code Robert at checkout. Get your gold, get your food, and don't get wiped out. Also, our law firm, the R&R Law Group. We are an amazing team of lawyers here at the R&R Law Group in Arizona, Scottsdale, 480-787-0394. We have a strong mission to help good people charged with crimes find safety, clarity, and hope, not only in their cases, but beyond that, in their lives. Absolutely free case evaluations. We have a whole amazing team of people. We can help with anything. Traffic offenses, misdemeanors, felonies, complicated, not so complicated, everything and anything in between. Any type of situation we can help with. So give us a call, 480-787-0394. Want to say thank you to the mods who mod down the forts for us, keep things nice and orderly. I saw Lean, Just Cause in the house. Shout out to Vientikis, K Bean. We've got Playing Hooky, Ronnie Cole. I think the mods are a little bit light today, but Zulu was in the house earlier this morning. So shout out to Zulu and our mod friends. But that, my friends, is it for us on the day. I want to thank everybody for being a part of the show. We are wrapping up a little early today because I got to get out the door for a little dinner event that I've got this evening. But we're going to be back tomorrow to do it all again at the same time, same place. And so I hope to see you here so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Have a great evening, my friends. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.